Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Talking Tokens webinar. I'm Chris Strahl, the co-founder and CEO of Knapsack, as well as the host of the Design Systems podcast. I'm really excited about this webinar because this started based on a LinkedIn conversation where we were all kind of talking about tokens in a shared chat on LinkedIn. And we decided to bring this conversation kind of out to the community. This has been in kind of three parts. We had a couple of episodes of the Design Systems podcast where we featured our panelists to talk about their perspective on tokens. And we wanted to bring that all together for you in this webinar. And so I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. There's also a Q&A that is open for the entire duration of the panel. It is a panel discussion, and so my intent is to highlight our guests and the other folks that are here. But you can feel free to ask questions in that Q&A. You can upvote, you can downvote, do anything you want along the way. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I already introduced myself. Oh my gosh, did we lose Amber?
We might have. Oh, there we go.
All right, well, here, Kaylig, you go ahead, and then we'll come back around to Amber.
Hey, I'm Kaylig. I work at Netlify on our front-end platform, and I'm also the co-chair of the Design Tokens community group, where we define a specification for how design tokens are being shared across tools and teams.
Great. Amber, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a technical issue. So hi, everyone. My name is Amber Stickle. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a principal design technologist at Intuit, where I sit between our design and engineering teams, bridging the gap and fostering collaboration.
Well, I'm Taylor Cashdan. I'm the design systems manager at the Mayo Clinic as of a few weeks ago, helping to evolve their internal tools and systems.
Hi, I'm Darren Simons. I am a senior product designer on the design systems team at MuleSoft.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have you all here. So excited to dive in. So first of all, we wanted to talk about tokens in the day-to-day. So how is it that you think about using tokens in your day-to-day? And if there was one thing that you could, do that would represent sort of that future, I would love to hear kind of from you. And so let's actually start with Taylor on this one. How do you use tokens in your day-to-day, and what would you love to see in the future change about that workflow?
I guess in the day-to-day and the most helpful thing is a way to codify and store decisions to get us away from like raw variables, so that when we're talking about colors and shapes and whatever with different product partners, whether they're engineers, product managers, designers, we can all be talking about the same thing and not have to remember hex values or sizes of things or try to reference what, the nitty-gritty stuff in the design space. And I'm hoping over time that the quote unquote language around design tokens becomes easier to understand for folks that aren't as tightly coupled with systems work, because that seems to be a big hurdle outside of our small ecosphere.
So what about you, Darren? Tell us a little bit about how you're using tokens now, because I think your use case is a little bit different.
Yeah. So we've just established some of our foundational tokens with like our typography within Figma. Currently, I don't use tokens at this very moment. We think more of the lines of if you've listened to the podcast, I use styling hooks where I create more of a convention for our developers to use, and really just writing that out in our specifications and handing that off to our developers to make our components come to life in that sense.
So what is it about those styling hooks that really are different from tokens?
I don't say they're actually different. They're pretty much the same thing, except styling hooks are that's the code side for our developers to use. So when we start designing our tokens, that will be within either Figma Token Studio or whenever Figma releases their native token feature. But right now, what we're using is really just a hook convention, which would be like a namespace the scope, an object, the type, and a modifier. So think of like your namespace would be like whatever your system's name is, and then the scope you have, we have 3 different types of scopes, global, shared, or component, and then going down that list, how that matches up with whatever we're building. So Styling hooks enables us to expose tokens for customization.
Have you found, Darren, that that styling hook setup and that model, it's helped bridge or help with the communication between disciplines, or is it more been just a tool infrastructure thing?
It's helping. I think right now we're in this space where do we need a hook for everything? And that's kind of what I'm doing. And we're working on that slowly but surely. We're trying to define that. But I think we're not going to try to write a hook for everything is what we're going to be at. But yeah, I'm just really interested to see what are the next steps for that, and then how we're going to bring that to fruition with design tokens within Figma.
So Amber, I saw you nodding and smiling with the not having a hook for everything. Tell us about your experience with this stuff.
Yeah, so at Intuit, working on the Intuit Design Systems team, I mentioned in the podcast, but we have a lot of design systems teams that we support. And so how we use design tokens is really, it's that foundational layer to the configurability and composability of our system. And so we're using design tokens to really ensure that there is flexibility for each brand to express themselves. And so, like, for example, we just recently had a situation where our typography tokens, we built them specifically, with Intuit in mind, and Intuit has one typeface throughout its products. But as soon as we acquired MailChimp, and MailChimp tried to use our typography tokens for our IDS components, they were like, we need 2 typefaces, right? And so we had to kind of like revisit our token layer and kind of like our typography component to support multiple typefaces. And so I think what I was smiling to what Darren said, I think the tricky thing about design tokens is really finding that, and I kind of spoke about on the podcast, but it's really finding that balance between precision and coverage. And I think like there is going to be situations where you might want to tokenize a lot of things, but maybe not everything. And that could be, again, because you want some things to be, durable, as we call it at Intuit. So like, consistent throughout these different product experiences. You might decide to create different layers of abstraction. I think it just really kind of depends on your team. How I kind of see, go ahead.
Oh, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, how I kind of see it going in the future would be, I think what I would love to see is just more visualization between those different tiers, right? Like, I think, us in the design systems space, we talk about tokens and design systems all day. So it's really easy maybe for us to grasp the concept of primitive and semantic and component tokens and the relationship between those alias tiers. But for someone like the MailChimp engineer who maybe isn't necessarily working day in and day out with design tokens, it would be really great if we had some way to like more easily visually show the relationship between these token tiers so they could better understand how their changes are impacting components that end users end up interacting with.
Taylor, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'm curious, Amber, did you guys find any challenges when those like post-acquisition, the merger of those 2 kind of token schema architecture things? So I feel like that's often a topic people get hooked up on. There's actually one question in the Q&A about like them being cumbersome in the naming convention and how that can be a challenge, especially when setting up initial architecture. And then when you're mentioning like when 2 brands merge, what happens then? How did you guys handle that situation?
I would say that we're still working on it, right? Like this example that I gave is still pretty fresh. And so I think it just comes down to treating your tokens and your design system as this evolving living thing that, can change over time in close collaboration with the subject matter experts who are working with your system every day. And so I think the way that we kind of approach it is knowing that this isn't permanent, this isn't going to live forever. And again, building it with that flexibility in mind to evolve over time, given the flexibility that some of these brands will want and need. And so I spoke about it on the podcast, but there's some brands that you can look at it Intuit and say like TurboTax, QuickBooks, maybe because of typeface and our color palette, it's more easily recognizable as an Intuit brand. But Credit Karma, is a great example of a brand that still that has a strong presence and strong design language that maybe they'll want to integrate to our technical architecture, right, using IDS components, but would want to remain that strong brand presence. And so just being open to the idea that acquisitions will happen. Again, you don't want to like force brands to express themselves a certain way. So just kind of like approaching it with curiosity and collaboration and iteration. I hope that answered your question.
That's great.
And Kaylee, we haven't heard from you. I uncharacteristically quiet on the topic of tokens architecture.
Yeah, well, the way we do things at Netlify is fairly low key. We use tokens everywhere in our product code base, but we mostly limit it to a single level. That allows us to have a very low cognitive load when learning the system. We rely a lot on Tailwind, and so it's been an interesting journey to align design and engineering on this, but we're getting there. And then we think we have some use cases where we need multiple levels, danger, info, error, those kind of. Yeah, I'm not gonna go and ramble about all these names and levels because naming is hard. But essentially, what I'm waiting for right now is that the tools themselves adopt tokens by default, so that we don't have to set up any custom tooling. And we do have some custom tooling to support our current token architecture. But let's be honest, we have one repo that really contains most of the product. And so we don't have scaling issues like you all, especially at Intuit, where I see and Salesforce, MuleSoft, there's a lot going on there. Having worked on some of these bigger design systems, I'm happy to not have to deal with that class of problems right now.
Awesome. Well, moving on, that's a great segue into talking about some of the tooling that is out there. Obviously being the co-founder of a startup that provides tooling in this space. I have a major stake in the ground in this, but I also kind of want to hear from you all, in particular about not necessarily like the tools you use and how, but like where is a gap in tooling in this space, and where is it that we still have a lot of evolution that we need to go through in order to get to a really solid baseline of capabilities so that everybody can use tokens. Kaylee, why don't we carry on?
I'll jump in. I'll jump in on this one.
You have the strongest opinion here for sure.
Yeah, well, a few years back, I was on my 4th design system setting the same kind of tooling, and I was like, "There's got to be a better way." Especially when we started exploring at Shopify a lot more tooling. My team was tasked to think about prototyping as a whole, end to end. What kind of tools at what point of the prototyping process should we use? And the most tedious task when trying those tools to get into a bit of a flow was, how do we replicate our design system in each single tool? And we quickly discovered our design language was, which was codified in design tokens, was not portable from one tool to another easily. And so it would take sometimes weeks to recreate our design language and our base components in every single tool that we were trying to try. That there had to be a better way. And so this is when I thought, well, maybe some interop layer would be interesting in there. So bringing interoperability through the same concept that APIs have brought interoperability and standards with web standards. And this is where I had the idea of founding a group that would create that specification that then the tools could adopt and get that portability across. So we're getting close. I think this is what is going to bring us into a new age of being able to port and to scale our design language, not only with an engineering team like an operations design system team, but bring it to everyone. So this is what I'm excited about.
Yeah, and it's great work. Like if anybody listening wants to check it out, we'll share a link in the chat so you can look at the conversation and jump in and participate.
I think what
check it out. It's a design systems community group hosted by the W3C, and check it out. Design tokens on Twitter as well.
I think it's worth mentioning an extension of that, Caleb, but like it's really important to remember that all of us as practitioners in this space is that this is kind of a new frontier, right? In many ways, like systems thinking, tokens, et cetera, has been around conceptually for a long time, but from a specific discipline perspective, like tooling for these things and this actually being prioritized by organizations is so new. So groups like the one that you're running are the new hotness, right? It's on the bleeding edge of what this could become, and I think that can often be frustrating for folks that are new to the space because they kind of expect to walk in and it be ready, or there'd be tools that are built for this. But just remembering that, like, all of us here, like in this webinar, on this panel thing, like we're all in the new world, right? Building this as we go, and there's going to be a lot of hiccups and good things and bad things, and that's just all, you know, working itself out as we iterate. So I think it's worth hitting on that as we kind of dig into this stuff deeper.
I'd like to put a quick a bit of color on the new hot thing. I believe the first company that was founded to build design token tooling and think about scaling the brand using APIs was founded 10 years ago. So the trains left the station a while ago. It's just the industry is taking a long time to catch up. And I agree. I think what you're pointing at is for organizations to prioritize this and consider this
Yes.
as a discipline is finally getting there, but it's still quite new.
Absolutely. And individual companies have their own like procurement processes on when they can even bring in new ideas and new tools and these things. I mean, I can speak to like when I was at Fidelity, for example, it took months to get a tool approved through the process. So by the time we like did the pitch, the tool even changed by the time we got to adopt it. You know, so like that's could be a good thing, but then, you know, at other, you know, startups, like another company I worked at, like we're able to just adopt a tool immediately. Like the risk is different at different orgs. So even if the tooling or these things are changing, like every org has their own schedule on when they can prioritize it or adopt it, which makes this infinitely more complex as practitioners.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think the concept of design tokens has been around for quite a while, but I think it really, where I really want to see like more improvement, and I think it's coming, you know, just slowly but surely, is really design token tooling in for the designers, right? I think there's so much tooling that has been so engineering centric. And I think like from the design systems I've worked on, the code seems to be the source of truth, whether it's, you know, in a GitHub repository that uses style dictionary to then translate that to different formats. I think that inability to support design tokens in tools that designers use every day is kind of, you know, I think holding back the real adoption that we will see in the future once these are actually in these tools. Because I think the concept of design tokens is so similar. Like I remember hearing about it, I think in 2018. So again, late to the game, but also not. But I remember hearing about it. And to me, I was like, oh, it's SAS variables. But instead of just being in a SAS language, it's something that can be used across multiple languages. That's cool, right? Because I had that coding background, it was really easy for me to grasp that concept and then like understand how to implement design tokens and how they would fit in our system. But I think just from my observations talking with designers on different design teams, I think that has been the missing gap there, right? Is like there hasn't been this standardized way, which is why we're so grateful for like the community group trying to work on that. But, you know, I think there hasn't been this industry standard on the design side for tooling around design tokens. And I think once that happens, we're going to see it really boom even more. And so that's where I'm excited for the future of that, because I think that's the last thing kind of holding us back from all kind of like embracing tokens and sharing that language across disciplines in an organization.
Hey, Darren, we haven't heard from you. Why don't you talk about this for a second?
I kind of going off what Amber's saying, like, yeah, this has been around for, you know, 10 years, right? But also for people like myself, who's very new, not new to design systems, but new to tokens, right? Like it's still very green for me. So as I'm working through this and hearing like Amber talk, I'm like, I get excited from just listening to her. I'm like, oh man, how cool would it be to have more designer friendly tooling for someone like myself? But I kind of like the aspect that I like kind of getting closer to the code level of things, because that piques my curiosity to want to learn more of HTML, CSS. Like I'm not there yet, but that's going to push me to get better at my craft so I can be more communicative to my developer team. And we can all just work really hand in hand and create better design systems. So that's where my head's at with all that.
Well, I also love the idea of designers being able to participate in design decisions more at that code level, right? There's a lot of stuff that happens that is a design decision at that implementation point in code, and the ability to have an opinion on that in that space is, I think, a really interesting new frontier.
Yeah,
Well,
agreed.
plus one with good, Darren.
You know, talking about not necessarily design tokens tools for designers, but I did want to make a quick announcement that Knapsack is open sourcing its full design token utilities. You can go check out the GitHub repository here. What this is a big library of quality of life things. It is sort of like tools for tool makers. So it's a collection of things that we use to make our token experience better for engineers and developers. It does use the draft specification from the tokens working group. And so we just got this live about 45 minutes ago. So check it out, take a look, let us know what you think. And we're trying to continue to push stuff into the community that helps us get better adoption and more broad adoption of tokens as we finish it in our own product. So check it out.
Congrats, and thank you for open sourcing that tooling. I'm super excited.
More to come. This kind of gets into the segue, you know, what Darren was talking about some of the more symbiotic relationships between design and engineering that are capable of tokens. We all think about tokens as this sort of cross-platform idea very often, but it also crosses disciplines. And I think that this is a really interesting topic to dive in on, to understand more about how, again, designers are able to have more input into what actually gets built in code. And likewise, engineers have more of an understanding about how things get designed. And so, Darren, why don't we go ahead and carry on with you and continue into this topic?
Yeah. So going back to, like, if again, with the podcast, you know, and talking about styling hooks, for people who don't know what a styling hook is, it's a Salesforce term for the ability to control exposure of CSS custom props for customization at different levels. So just kind of lay the context for that. So a lot of my time I am writing styling hooks for my development team within my spec. So I'll have a visual, we'll just call it like maybe an input label, and I will have that label where I have to create, where it's just to kind of give you like an example, the namespace will be like -- loom, that's our design system name, dash, maybe it's a shared hook. So it's a shared across different, you know, inputs. So input text, input select, maybe even across radio and checkboxes for that label. And then what is that object type? So we have the component name, which could be it could be called label. And then, you know, other things as well. It could be different variants of that, or states as well. So it can carry on throughout the whole scheme of that. But that's what I'm writing day to day. And what we do is I'll create this, I'll then bring it to my development team, even my other designers, like my manager, my senior product designers, my lead designers. We all look at this and make sure we're all on the same page, talking the same language. That way we're consistent across the board. And if we don't agree upon something, well, we're going to talk about it. But it's all there. And the way that we do this is we have the visual in Figma, and then I have like a table underneath of it, writing out all the different possible hooks that we have. And then we also create like Google Sheets to have like a lookup table to show where those maybe shared values are too.
Awesome. What does that look like for you, Amber?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've been specializing in this space as, you know, design technologist, UX engineer, whatever you really want to call it, for the past few years. And so I think I am someone that embraces, you know, the design community, learning more about code in the context of just understanding how these design decisions are going to be, you know, represented in the canvas that they're intended for. And so really being able to, again, like, be able to see things and interact with things the way that their end user and customers would. And so I think before, you know, again, design technology is pretty still nascent to the industry, or it's been around for a while, but I think organizations are starting to, especially large scale organizations, are starting to recognize the need for that specialization. But I think, you know, one of the reasons that we're starting to see design tokens be so widely adopted across these orgs is because design is having to scale faster than ever and be maintained at that scale. and it's happening very quickly. And so I think the sooner that we can, again, it starts with, tooling to kind of, again, bridge that gap and get designers to kind of shift their thinking into more of that like systematic approach that I think engineering teams have been thinking about or taking that approach for a while. I think, it'll be really great to see designers maybe embrace code a little bit more to have that shared vocabulary and that shared understanding of the medium that they're designing for. And on the flip side, I think what's really great about tokens is it really does like help engineers understand the purpose and intent behind a specific decision. And that's what I really love specifically about like semantic tokens, because they can understand, okay, this is meant for warnings, this is meant for, new opportunities or danger, et cetera, like just thinking of like feedback mechanisms at that semantic layer. And so I think tokens are really like, really that like bread and butter of like bringing those disciplines together. And so I'm really excited to see in the future, like more designers kind of embrace code and kind of like wanting to learn how to like use tokens to kind of scale their designs. And especially with generative AI coming down the pipeline pretty quickly, like I just think like the design role in general is going to have to really shift. Product design role, let me clarify, the product design role in general is really going to have to shift to be more technical, and be open to really having that shared language of engineering, and engineering again learning more about design and the process through these tools, which is exciting.
Yeah, I always love how you're very keen on the expression, design as the expression of intent. I've borrowed that many times in some of our conversations over the past month. So I love that take. Taylor, I think you have a kind of like a different sort of spicy take on this as well, that I wouldn't call it oppositional, but it's definitely a different sort of thought pattern around this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's worth saying, like, I think everything, Amber, you said is on par. I think the challenge is for those either new to this ecosystem or who are outside of it, often see or read things like tokens will fix everything, right? And then once they're in design tools, everything will just work perfectly. But it's unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see it, tokens, like anything else, are just another tool in our toolbox. And they take the same amount of care and thought and procedure and digging and mistakes and anything else that all of the other tools and libraries and resource hubs that we curate as practitioners would need. And I think what's great is seeing, the result of Kalig's group's work kind of helping to give us a starting point, right, to really jump from, as opposed to having to start from a blank screen every time. But I really like to reinforce that, like, design tokens or tooling like Figma or something that's supporting tokens is not a magic wand that's going to make everything work at your organization or make your system all of a sudden be perfect. They still require the same attention and love and care and disappointment and movement that any other thing that we provide as practitioners need to make sure it stays afloat.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think it really comes down to that mindset shift, right? And that like old metaphor of like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We can come out with all of these tools. It's like, we see it with documentation, right? You can document your design system to the moon and back, and you're still going to have people in Slack be like, where do I find this component? It's like, damn it, just go to the link. But like, I think it really, and that just maybe like not the best example, but the point is it's really like over communicating the tooling to really help be a catalyst for that mindset shift that I think that we as a design practice are going to need. So to your point, it's not, I think people put too much stock in tooling when it really needs to be how we approach our problems and really thinking about that more holistically.
100%.
Kalig, what about you?
Well, the way I always think about design tokens, and I think it's been pointed out that it's a tool, not a panacea. It does unlock certain things, but it in itself is just a tool. What I'm really looking at is that shared language, that shared understanding between practices. When we started doing responsive design, it was interesting. There was a lot of debates about how to name your breakpoints. And I remember codifying that in code and educating or evangelizing those terms across the company was the kind of where my foray into tokens kind of really started, because documenting how we were thinking about mobile tablet, mobile landscape, desktop, white desktop, and making sure every single person on every single team was using those terms, down to the code and the design tools, and the product team and the UX team, and like every single person was using that. That just gave me a sense of, yeah, you need that work, that extra work that has to do with education and training. So it's that's how I think about it. But again, it just all comes to speaking the same language.
Yeah, it's funny. Like at the very least, tokens are making it so that the fighting about naming is now cross-functional instead of within a team. That's actually a great segue into education. Thinking about how we talk about this, promote this, show this around the organizations and the communities we work within, what represents the best, maybe the best is not the right word, what represents an effective form of education about tokens within, your company and within the communities you're a part of. And Kalik, in the tradition of this panel now, the last speaker gets to go first. So please, you have probably the most levels that you touch between the working group and where you work and where you've previously worked.
Well, so there's multiple levels of abstractions at which you can solve education. There's one that is like really 50,000 feet industry wide. People are still catching up. And then the lowest level is at the team level, like I was just mentioning in my prior answer. So I think as an industry, in my bubble, I see a lot of enthusiasm, but I'm not sure every single enterprise, bank, insurance company has caught up, like the old school that don't necessarily define themselves as a tech company, but they're trying to catch up, right? And so do they have a good design practice? What is their design maturity, et cetera? And so there's going to be a lot of education, which I think will the specification will help with, in the sense that tools adopting it and having it baked in will make it part of the work, like a natural part of the workflow. So educating folks, and even I see questions in the chat about getting approval for these things. Right now, it seems like I've seen a few people saying it's a bit of a nice to have, so it's hard to convince your procurement folks about it because they're not educated about this space. I'm hoping that there will be less campaigning and convincing and educating related to should we even use this, and rather the industry will move to, but that's part of, like, why not use this? It would be the question more than should we use this. That's kind of how I think about it. But then, yeah, to the team level, I think it puts a lot of, when you start scaling multi-brand, multi-platform, it puts a lot of pressure on the documentation. I think tools like Knapsack are awesome for this, to help teams have that single source of truth documented, meeting them where they are. So it's like that just-in-time documentation without having to do as much work, like workshops, like internal webinars, those kind of documentation websites, etc. So yeah, pushing that documentation and that information to the edges is not easy, and I think that's very powerful to educate teams at scale.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would love to chime in here. I think so. In my previous experience, well, we're actually looking at token education now at Intuit, because we did do like a semantic token exercise with our QuickBooks Design Systems team. And as part of that, we did some user studies, and, we had a Figma plugin, and we said, hey, like, look in the library, see if you can find the token you're looking for based on the name. And 9 times out of 10, they're looking at color, right? They're not looking at they're looking at the color swatch. They're not looking at the name. And so I think, and we learned some other insights from there, I think, about like just communicating the value of tokens. I think there's this educational piece of like, this is a token and this is like what tokens are for. But I think what I found the most successful, and I'll speak to my experience at Sprout Social, was really communicating that customer impact of tokens. And so at Sprout Social, we're, one web application, and we did have multiple like cross-functional teams, we call them zones, that worked across that web application. And so trying to corral everyone to say, hey, stop what you're doing. take all of this legacy, or not, legacy code, but like take all of these hard-coded hex values and all of these literal tokens and switch to semantic tokens, even though you already have a pretty packed roadmap. This is why you need to do that, right? And I think, again, it's one thing when you kind of frame it in like a feature like, oh, we're introducing dark mode. That's cool. But I think when you actually show them like, so in that approach, we actually took, I don't want to say shotgun, but we did take a widespread approach of like documentation, video recordings, actual live sessions with both product, design, and engineering to really communicate that customer impact. And I think the most success we found specifically with our product organization, again, the PMs who hold the roadmap and kind of like, allocate resources, was really like saying, hey, this is what we can enable. We can do dark mode. Here's the customer impact here, but then here's all the things we can enable in the future, right? Like multiple themes. We could have fun and do an April Fool's Day type of thing, and just kind of like planted some seeds of the things that were possible with tokens. I think that was like really, I think, the most successful thing, because I think it was like, okay, now we get this concept, but now we can see why it's worth the investment now, so that we can unlock more product features in the future. Or again, like communicating with engineers, you tailor that message a bit to, you don't have to rewrite code for a specific theme, it could just automatically switch, and then tailoring that message for designers as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as humans, we're not particularly great at understanding abstract systems. And so the amount of education that is required to understand in practice what this feels like and looks like, I've seen that be a hurdle for a lot of organizations to try to make sure that like the richness of what you're communicating about the implementation of tokens really shows people the value. Darren, you look like you're ready to jump in.
I was just going to say, I really liked what Amber was mentioning in regards to like how you're saying token education of like, I got my team together and we all kind of wrote out practical, like what we thought it would be. And I thought that's like, you don't think about doing it, but maybe I'm like, man, maybe we should do that, because you might be thinking totally something different than what I'm thinking. How can we get on the same page with that? Some things that I saw yesterday, matter of fact, that some of my Salesforce counterparts have a lookup. I think they looked up a hex value, but then it generated like the actual styling hook for what that should be. And that was kind of cool. I'm like, so you can create internal tools to help us better. I think Atlassian does this too, where they have like, you can like look up whatever token you need to look up, and it's right there for you, which is kind of pretty interesting. So stuff like that. But yeah, I think the common ground is here, communication. Talking to one another. And then I really love, I wrote that down, Amber, of like, let's have a practice. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm glad you like that, because I think, again, like the thing that we really found was just that hands-on. We're working with tokens, right, in a design systems context. Like, we work with design systems, we understand the space and we understand the end customer impact. But I think being able to demo that either through a presentation or actually a hands-on exercise for people to get the power of tokens is, I think, when like the light bulb kind of clicks, because it's kind of that empathy exercise that, they're not working with tokens on a day-to-day. Even the design systems teams that are partner design systems teams are maybe interacting with only semantic or maybe very specific component tokens. And so, maybe there's certain concepts around tokens that are like unfamiliar to them that we would need to educate. So I really do think, like to Caleb's point, there's just all these levels of education, almost like these like concentric circles. And I think, you can start with like a certain craft or discipline or certain team, and then kind of scale outwards from there.
Taylor, any final thoughts?
No, I've been digging through the chat and answering questions in there. There's a lot of good stuff around token management and how do we handle semantic versus symbolic and all these different like levels of token architecture. So I've been kind of digging into that world, but I don't know. There's not much on this panel that I disagree with. I think all these folks are really great stances that are shared by myself. So nothing to add.
Awesome. Any final thoughts from anybody? This is the last question before we move on to some of the deeper Q&A. So from here, we have a quick announcement, and then we're gonna dive into Q&A. But I want to give all of our panelists an opportunity to wrap things up. So going from the top, Darren, you have any final thoughts?
No, not really. I just wanted to thank you, Chris, for doing this. This is such a really cool experience to be on a panel with all these intelligent, minds of tokens. So like I keep saying, it's surreal for me because it's a cool experience. I'm the younger designer of the group. So yeah.
Your stoking enthusiasm throughout this has been infectious. So really appreciate you being here as well, as I appreciate all of you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think it's been really great having such a diverse range of folks who have different experiences with tokens, right? Because I think that's kind of the reality of it, right? Like we all work at different size organizations with different levels of maturity of their, design at that organization, different budgets, procurement processes, et cetera. And so I think, I'm really grateful that we had such a diverse panel. So hopefully, anyone of any type of organization could learn something that's relevant to what they need now. And Darren called us old. I'm just kidding.
No way. well knowledgeable,
There you go.
Experienced, I think, is where he was aiming at. I think the only things I'd try to close on is just, again, remembering that tokens are tools, right? That's just one of my personal takeaways. And the other is that every organization is different, right? With in terms of like what tools they'll be able to use, whether they're tokens or Figma or Tailwind or whatever. And every process is going to be different depending on the org you're at. So don't be afraid to like see, read, hear from someone like the people on this panel or a talk or something. Try it and then adapt it to fit your org. There's no like one single way to do anything, especially in software. So there are best practices and things you can follow that'll be, save you time and heartache, but it's okay to have flavors of those things that best support your consumers, your teams, and your products.
Kaylee, any final thoughts?
No, thanks, mate, for putting this together. And if anyone's in the Seattle area wants to geek out about tokens over a glass of wine or a beverage, hit me up. My DMs are open on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, our next webinar is May 31st, same time. It's going to be about design systems buying guide. I'm hosting that one as well. We're going to talk a lot about how you assess your organization for what level and what implementation you're really ready for as a design system. Talk about some of the architectural considerations, security, and looking at a lot of things about ROI and how you actually present this in your organization to purchase and adopt a design system. So join us for that. Feel free to register. Registration link will be in the chat, and I think Lindsay just posted it there. So with that, take a moment, if you have additional questions, throw them in the chat. I know that we've got a couple of them marked by our panelists that they're excited to answer. And so we'll dive into those, but questions are still open. Keep on rolling it. Taylor, you had one that was specifically from an anonymous attendee about the legal team. And so how do you convince your department or company's legal team to use design system tools that can positively impact your work? Do you want to dive into that?
Yeah, sure. So the direct experience that I can kind of lean on to talk to that is when we were converting from our Sketch and Envision ecosystem at Fidelity to Figma as our like single tool to handle all the many things. And it was a much more complex process than I originally thought it was going to be. And it was a kick to the face and a discouragement. I'm like, oh, this is going to take so long to get through. So I feel your pain. I think the tip I could give, right, or tips I could give is, number one, like, remember that as practitioners, we're seeing the direct value of the tooling and the features that will help us do our work, but we have to also convince folks from a business lens, right? So what money and time is this going to save us in the long run by using this tool over another one? What capacity or security benefits or scale or other tools we can decommission by using this new tool, right? So any of that sort of data you can curate, populate, think through, do the little math on, will help make your case stronger for saying we should use this rather than this, or we should try this new tool or not. That's the first thing. The second is most of these organizations that run these tools, like Figma, for example, will do pilot tests with you, right? So you can actually demo some of the work, you can try it, you can then have recordings and things to show leadership as to why that's helpful, why it's not, what things are able to kind of, circumvent problems that you're experiencing at the org level or help speed things up. So in other words, the more data and more information you can bring to the table that crosses beyond the direct benefit it gives to you and your workflow, the stronger the case for, say, a procurement person or an ops person to go, okay, I don't really understand the tool, but I understand the benefits you're talking about. I can help you make the case stronger. And then just riding the wave, right? On like, well, it's going to take legal 6 months and that's just normal. But the more data you can give them to help make that decision or help sway them in the way of like, this is good, this is helpful, the better.
Yeah. I mean, having been on the vendor side for the better part of 18 years, one of the things that's always a really big challenge is the delta between wanting to buy software and how you buy software as a company. And oftentimes it's an educational process for that person that is championing that software application to understand how their organization actually buys something. And so trying to educate yourself on that and understanding like who you talk to, what hoops you go through, that really helps, because then you have an awareness of your process that you can also share with your vendor that helps you understand how to navigate that environment.
Yeah. And the last piece I'll add to that is if you're in an environment or a company where security is top priority, be sure to let other folks know before you're testing these tools, because what you don't want to do is accidentally put your employment at risk because you're using some tool that was unsecure, right? So just check with your manager, check with a procurement person, whatever, get some sort of email trail that's like, yes, you can play with this thing on your work computer before doing it, so you don't put yourself at risk.
Also, Knapsack is fully SOC 2 compliant. Anyways, Kayla, you had one. Are there specific considerations for versioning? In software, it is common to maintain versions over time and then deprecate. Is this something to consider in design tokens? Is this something that designers are used to?
So I'll start with the last one. Is it something designers are used to? I would say more and more. I'm also seeing that design schools or design curriculums include a lot of more coding nowadays. And so people coming fresh out of school, they don't necessarily care what kind of medium they use to design. You put them with a text editor or a design tool or both, and it seems like they're super good at both, which makes us the old folks, the old guard, look a bit dated, to be honest, sometimes. So I think those folks will have more of an understanding of how even software is shipped and versioning, etc. So I'm excited for that. Good news is we're in good hands. Semantic versioning has been around for a while. It's pretty well understood by engineering teams. The tooling around it is amazing. And so now when it comes to versioning tokens directly in design tools or in design token tools, and spreading that, having good hygiene around it, like release notes, change logs, those kind of things, announcements of breaking changes, building tooling around those breaking changes. So for example, Atlassian's got these code mods that you run a command on your code base and it changes the legacy version to the new version automatically for you across your entire code base. That's like quality of life adoption tooling that is amazing. Is that understood by designers yet? I don't see it that much. I also don't know what migrating from one token library version to another looks like in Figma. I have no idea what the current practices are. But yeah, so versioning, lots of best practices that you can borrow from the engineering world. Lots of good literature on it and very well understood.
Wonderful. Got a question from Maya. Hi, Maya. It's good to hear from you. I haven't seen you in a while. Maya's refactoring tokens now to support themes. Curious how you operationalize the practice of theme creation and maintenance. And Amber, you'd flagged this one is something you were interested in.
Yeah, it's something that we're actually, again, going through right now. And so we focus a lot on design tokens as this core IDS team because we really want that Intuit experience to be there at that foundational level. And again, I've mentioned this 100 times, but how brands express that, with those tokens is kind of like up to them at the component level. And so we collaborate very closely with our product teams to help them define like the component tokens they might need and semantic tokens that they might need, maybe not like the semantic token taxonomy per se, but the values of those semantic tokens, because we do kind of want to try to streamline the consistency as much as possible. So someone who's in the chat, Nate Baldwin, I'm going to give him a shout out because he's actually been working very closely. He's also at Intuit with me on the same team. And so he's been working very closely with our QuickBooks design systems team to help them define those semantic tokens at all these different layers as part of like a UX modernization project that we're doing. And so at that tactical or strategic level, we have, and I say we again, Nate, meets with that team weekly to actually work with them on the types of tokens that they need, help guide them through what they should consider from, again, that larger systematic perspective. And then on the technical implementation side, we do have a design tokens repository right now. We are kind of reinventing how we manage our design tokens, but as of now, we have a GitHub repository where engineers or designers, if they feel comfortable contributing in GitHub, are able to actually contribute tokens and change tokens within their theme directory at any point in time. And we actually have the code owners for those, directories be the design systems teams themselves. They're more than welcome to, we as an Intuit design systems team are always there for code reviews and PRs reviews for anything that's the Intuit theme, but a MailChimp designer or engineer is, more than able to go into our tokens repository, update those values, see how, it translates to the IDS components locally and make those changes themselves. And so we do maintain and support, and again, put a heavy emphasis on collaboration to guide those teams, but we try to make sure there's a lot of autonomy and then being able to define those values. And then the last thing I'll say is, I saw the comment around documentation. We do have documentation on our website, but then we do, communicate a lot via Slack. We do have, our tools will actually take those token changes and actually distribute them to Figma libraries. And so there's a bunch of different ways that we make sure that teams are up to date with the changes that are happening.
Great. Question from Matt Oliver, Kaylee, Amber, Taylor, and Darren. I think a lot of people in the community would agree that it can be exhausting to sell the benefits of systems and design tokens. Can you share a story with the group about the time when you saw it click with stakeholders for you? I really like this question. Jump on in.
I marked it as to answer live because I think the harsh reality that many of us who are in this space have either learned the hard way or semi-new coming in is it's the 50% of the work is constantly selling and communicating and teaching and showing and being willing to re-explain, because you got to remember it's a small group of folks that are in the weeds supporting n number of consumers, right, across different brands, across different departments, across different scales of the company. So I think what was really nice, and I can give one very tiny story, was we did a lot of work at a previous org to structure we'll talk about Figma as an example, structure the Figma styles, right, to be reminiscent of the token architecture, but not a one-to-one, because folks just didn't have time to think about which grouping of things, what's the right semantic label, but being able to say, like text default, right, or text body or something like that inside the tool where they were, meeting them where they at, and then adding the token in, say, the description. So when you searched it in the field, it still popped up. We're able to bridge that gap a little tighter so that they found the thing they wanted to see. They knew knew how to get there. And we created an education opportunity to say, and by the way, if you're starting to learn the tokens, you can also search by them and it'll pull up the thing you're used to. And it started to create a momentum on folks going, okay, wait a minute, I know what text body is. I can now see the token that's mapped to it because it's in the description. And when I talk to my engineer or when I talk to the designer or whomever, I could use both terms. And it was an aha moment that, like, okay, something we're doing here is clicking. And instead of forcing them to learn our token architecture, we met them where they were and we used the native architecture and functionality inside the tool they were in to abstract the token label, as part of it, which started to create that confidence in folks as they consume things.
Great example of meeting people where they already work. Anybody else have anything they want to share on that front?
Can't share a specific story, but I think it starts with listening. And that's the same thing I tell to early stage startup kind of sales folks. You're not selling, you're listening to people and you're learning. And maybe down the road, you will shape your product in a way that transforms into a buy. And that's the same for design systems. When I was leading the design systems team at the Financial Times, I would do my homework on trying to understand how every single team functioned and what kind of priorities a PM would have. And then I would go to them and try to understand more. Okay, tell me about your deadlines. Tell me about how you work. Like, how much do you ship? Who is your audience? And then I would try to find angles where, oh, you know what, maybe that could help you ship faster, or tell me more about that time where you couldn't ship and because there was a design defect, something like that. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like that could be a good thing to try next time, and not try to shove it down people's throats, but like really try to meet them where they are.
Wonderful. So I'm going to pick a little bit of a selfish question because it's something that I'm really interested in. Pipwin asked a question: how could AI help with tokens? And we touched on this a little bit in some of the podcast conversation. I really love to hear from you all what you think, because I have really strong opinions here. And so hearing from you guys gives me a chance to educate myself on what everybody's thinking in the community around this stuff.
I personally feel like AI in general is just going to be an accelerant, right? And I think it's going to be a catalyst for the work that we do, and we're going to be able to move faster, but there's still going to need to be humans that understand those relationships and communicate those relationships across these tokens, and making sure, again, that you don't have this AI generated token system that's so robust that people kind of forget, like, okay, how many tokens do we have? What token do we have here? Like, when should I use this one versus that one? So I think AI, like design tokens, is a tool that we can use in many aspects of our system. But I think, again, if tokens, in my opinion, like tokens have so much intent that would need to be communicated and kind of managed via a human. And so that's just kind of like my general take on AI, but that's kind of the way I think we could see AI generating tokens, but in terms of actually curating tokens and making sure that it makes sense for your brands and your product organization and your teams, that's going to be human.
I was thinking about, like, humans still have to consume these things, right? And so you still have to have a human that puts it into practice. And so I do view AI also as having this really awesome capability to help us take this novel that we all write into our design system software and help us parse through that more quickly. So, like, when do I use a primary color? And being able to ask my design system that is kind of an interesting thought too.
Yeah, and for content as well, I've tried documentation chatbots, and it was super interesting. Like they can parse information super well and return to you exactly what's for your use case. And the way large language models work and the way generative AI works is that you need to give it a set of constraints that helps them produce work that is meaningful to you. Otherwise, they're just going to hallucinate the hell out of like every single response is going to be kind of off point. And you can see that even in the way you can engineer prompts for the current, ChatGPT, for example. If you say, give me a list of 5 ways to reshape this sentence, it's the way it's going to kind of try to give you answers is not as good as if you tell it, if you give a certain different way. So for example, let's brainstorm on this and a few more characteristics. It's going to give you a much richer answer that is more powerful and more useful for you. And I think that design tokens, especially if you start describing and documenting every single design token, can provide this kind of, like, this is the tent you're operating in. Like, you, let's brainstorm a little bit outside of it. If you like, maybe you can prompt it to do that, but let's play in that sandbox. And so you can actually produce work that you could potentially use.
So this is all the time we have for today. There's a lot of questions that we didn't get to. What I'd love to do is if we could arrange to organize some office hours or something like that via the design system Slack. If the panelists are willing, I'd love to try to continue this thread, because it's been an awesome conversation. And I really appreciate all of you so much for all of the time you've given and your thoughts, ideas, conversations. Darren, Taylor, Kaylee, Amber, I can't thank you enough for putting this together.